Live from Washington, this is BBC News. Protests across France over the appointment of Michel Barnier as the new Prime Minister. Huge rallies in cities across Israel as demands grow for a deal to release hostages in Gaza. Britain and America's top spies warn the international world order is under threat in a way not seen since the Cold War. The first visit by a British leader to Ireland in 5 years, but how does Sir Keir Starmer plan to repair a relationship so damaged by Brexit? Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. More than 100,000 people joined protests across France on Saturday over President Macron's appointment of right-wing politician Michel Barnier as the new Prime Minister. It follows Mr Macron's rejection of a candidate presented by the left-wing bloc that won the most seats in those recent elections. Mr Barnier is the EU's former Brexit negotiator and says he's open to forming a government with MPs across the political spectrum, including on the left. But those left-wing parties, trade unions, many voters as well, are furious that Mr Macron blocked their own candidate. There are 130 protests across the country. It was Paris that drew the largest crowds, but there were major demonstrations in Marseille, Nantes, Nice and Strasbourg. Those protesters saying that President Macron has made a mockery of those who successfully mobilised against the far right in snap parliamentary polls.
Since the dissolution, we've been fighting like dogs to prevent the far right from gaining an absolute majority. We succeeded. We had 21 days, we did a crazy marathon with the activists and all that, and we succeeded in stopping them. And what have we got here? A far-right government.
Well, this summer's inconclusive election in France left the country in a political deadlock. The left-wing bloc winning the largest number of seats, but falling short of enough to form a government. President Macron defending his decision to appoint a right-wing prime minister by saying the leftist candidate, Lucie Castex, stood little chance of surviving a confidence vote in the National Assembly. Our Paris correspondent Hugh Schofield gave us this assessment of the new Prime Minister.
I wouldn't say he's a controversial figure, but his nomination is controversial, that's for sure. He's a fairly consensual figure. He's not an extremist by any means. He's from the centre-right. But the fact is that he is Macron's nominee. He is from the centre-right, and the left, who've been protesting today, are absolutely furious because they won the election. They have the biggest number of seats in Parliament, so it should be them who have the first choice to form a government, and their nominee as Prime Minister should be Prime Minister. Macron has said no. The Constitution says that I can choose. If I named a left-wing Prime Minister, there's no way that person would have survived a vote of confidence in Parliament, whereas with Michel Barnier, there is a chance that he'll survive a vote of confidence in Parliament. And that's because we think that the populists under Marine Le Pen, for the moment, will kind of put up with him and vote him out. So that's where we're at. I mean, the Prime Minister, Mr Barnier, is in a very precarious position, but he's holding on, and that is what has incensed the left and brought them on the street today.
The family of a Turkish-American activist who was killed in the occupied West Bank on Friday are demanding an independent US-led investigation into her death. Eyewitnesses say Ayşen Ezgayagi was shot dead by Israeli soldiers during an anti-settlement protest. The United Nations is also calling for a full investigation into her death. Well, this incident comes as Israeli forces ended a nearly 10-day security operation mainly focused on the West Bank city of Jenin. Palestinians living in the area returned to homes and infrastructure reduced to rubble. There were large demonstrations too in cities across Israel. Families of Israeli hostages and anti-government protesters calling for a ceasefire and the release of hostages.
We have to shout loud that we have to bring them alive now. We cannot wait any longer. It's been enough, 11 months exactly today, that the people are dying in the tunnel. We cannot let it happen. We cannot go on with our life without thinking about them, without praying that they will come back home with us, and they're not supposed to be there.
That's a shame that the good government represents us. It's a far away from what the people of Israel thinking, the majority.
The last week has made it clear that nobody can just sit still. If nobody will shout, people will use our silence Unfortunately, our government is not thinking about the people, the citizens.
Well, despite these demands for a truce, the war goes on. At least 8 people were killed in a strike on a displacement camp inside a school shelter in Gaza. Gaza is also facing its first polio outbreak in 25 years. Health workers will soon start a second round of vaccination. The UN says at least 187,000 Gaza children have been vaccinated so far. The eventual goal, though, is 640,000. Efforts to bring a ceasefire have not yet yielded a result, despite several rounds of internationally mediated indirect talks between delegations from Israel and Hamas. The head of MI6, Richard Moore, and CIA Director William Burns have appeared in public together for the first time at a security conference in London. Mr. Burns, who has been part of efforts to reach a ceasefire in Gaza, said the US is working with other mediators to refine the existing framework for a deal.
We have to all remember that despite all of that work that needs to be done, this is ultimately a question of political will. And this gets to your question. Whether or not leaders on both sides are prepared to recognize that enough is enough and that the time has come finally to make some hard choices and some difficult compromises. I hope profoundly that both of those leaders are going to make that decision because, as I said, there's an enormous amount at stake here.
The 2 intelligence leaders also covered Ukraine's seizure of Kursk in Russia, which they described as a significant tactical achievement.
It's absolutely critical that we do sustain our support to Ukraine. And it's really difficult. It's hard. And particularly in eastern Ukraine, this is attritional warfare where there is a huge amount of suffering on both sides. And Putin is pushing forward in a sort of attritional, Pyrrhic campaign of taking village by village as he goes forward. When he takes those, there's nothing left. I mean, that's why I deliberately used the term Pyrrhic. There is nothing left. Because everything is utterly destroyed. But that is the Kremlin way of war. That's what they did in Grozny, it's what they did in Aleppo, and it's what they're now doing in it. So it is tough, but it's also important to remember that our Ukrainian friends have an absolute will to fight. And it's important to remember how this started. It started in this phase with Putin mounting a war of aggression in February 2022. And 2.5 years later, that failed. It continues to fail. The Ukrainians will continue to fight. We will continue to help them to fight.
To Kenya now, where more than 17 children remain missing after a fire at a school. At least 21 people died. Remain missing after a fire at a school. At least 21 people died when the blaze swept through a dormitory in the central county of Nyeri. DNA tests do need to be carried out to identify some of the bodies, but the authorities have established that 139 other students have now been accounted for. Our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher has the latest on the search where the school is located.
Efforts are continuing to trace the children who are still missing. It's thought that some parents may have picked up their children without reporting it. It's also been suggested that some children may have taken refuge with members of the community who came to try and help put out the fire. We spoke to one woman at the school who said that she had been attending a late-night vigil at a church nearby, and the congregation heard the screams from the school, and some of them went there and found out what was going on. So you can imagine the chaos there. She also said, though, that she had not been able to find her 11-year-old nephew. The family had checked at the various hospitals, and they were very afraid that his body might be one of those that had not been able to be identified, because that's another thing that's going on, the DNA testing of the remains that have been too burnt to be recognized. And there is also an investigation into why this happened. We don't know what the cause of it was. The president has promised a thorough investigation. It is true that fires at schools are common in Kenya over the past years for various reasons. One of them would be poor safety standards, overcrowding. Another would be arson. Some of the fires have been attributed to students who lit them themselves, sometimes because they're angry at the teachers, sometimes because they're angry at the workload or the living conditions. So those are the reasons schools have burned in the past, but we don't know what happened here. And that is very much a focus of what's going on now, alongside those efforts, of course, to try to find the children who are still unaccounted for.
Barbara Pladasha there. Let's turn to some other stories from around the world. Venezuelan security forces have surrounded the Argentine embassy in Caracas, which is sheltering 6 Venezuelan political figures opposed to President Maduro. The Foreign Ministry alleges that terrorist acts were being plotted inside the building, including assassinations. The Venezuelan government has also revoked its permission for Brazil to represent Argentina's diplomatic interests. Relations between Argentina and Venezuela broke down after disputed presidential elections in July, which gave Mr. Maduro a 3rd term in office. Tense scenes in Glasgow amid 2 separate demonstrations. Hundreds of people joined one rally on Saturday promoted by the far right. They were outnumbered by an estimated 2,000 people who demonstrated under the banner "Stand Up to Racism." Police kept the 2 sides apart and later said officers arrested 2 people. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says it's time to reset relations between the UK and Republic of Ireland, as he became the first UK Prime Minister to visit Dublin in 5 years. Tensions over Brexit had soured relations between the UK and Ireland, but Keir Starmer has been holding talks with his counterpart Simon Harris and says the visit marked a new era of cooperation and of friendship. Our Ireland correspondent Sarah Gervin reports.
After years of strained relations, this was the moment Sir Keir Starmer was given 100,000 welcomes to Dublin. There were smiles and handshakes as he and his Irish counterpart were presented with football jerseys.
This will be proudly worn in North London before too long.
Both leaders said this was an opportunity to renew and deepen the friendship between Britain and Ireland.
I know as 2 new leaders of our respective countries, we both said we wish to really place British-Irish relations on a new path, and I really appreciate the time that you've given to that since taking office.
It's really important to me, to my government, and I think it is the moment for reset, and it's when we put meaning behind those words.
International matters took centre stage following a round-table business discussion.
We have to be clear in the face of Russian aggression. We have to stand together, to coordinate, stand with our allies and give Ukraine all of the support that it needs for as long as it needs.
Photo opportunities are one thing, but the Taoiseach and Prime Minister will need to decide what a reset in their relationship actually looks like. Symbolism is important here, but moving forward, they'll need to deliver substance over style.
Is this me here? Afternoon.
And there have already been announcements. A yearly summit between the 2 countries addressing trade, security, justice and climate. Both governments came to send the message that when it comes to the relationship between Britain and Ireland, this is a new ball game. Sarah Gervin, BBC News in Dublin.
Charges against the father of a US school shooter are raising fresh questions about the culpability of parents for their children's crimes. Arrest warrants say Colin Gray provided his 14-year-old son Colt with a gun last year, knowing that his son, quote, was a threat to himself and others. Officials suspect Colt Gray may have used that same weapon to kill 4 people and wound 9 others at Appalachia High School in Georgia on Wednesday. The charges come 5 months after Michigan parents Jennifer and James Crumbly became the first parents held criminally responsible for their child's attack. To get more perspective on this, I've been speaking to Chris Brown, president of the Brady United Against Gun Violence group, and I got her reaction to parents being held responsible for their children's crimes. So, Chris, it sends a very clear message, but do you think it's going to change behaviour?
Well, yes, I do think it will have an impact on a lot of gun owners in this country who recognize, well, maybe the facts and circumstances in this particular case are extreme because he knew that his son was at risk. But this is negligence law, right? What the prosecutor is amassing is what would a reasonable person believe would happen if they had a loaded, unsecured weapon in the home. And the reality of the way that law works in the United States is if you have a loaded and unsecured gun in the home and you have individuals routinely accessing those weapons, you need to safely store the firearm or you may be facing similar charges because 76% of school shooters in the United States obtain their firearm from a home, if not their own parent's home, then a friend or neighbor's home. So this is on all Americans. And I think as the trial proceeds, I expect it to be broadcast on TV. Many more Americans who have guns in the home are going to be watching that and thinking twice about how they store their firearms.
Is there not a concern here, though, Chris, that the default in a situation like this perhaps is to use the law rather than tackling some of the bigger issues that are at play?
Of course, I share those concerns, right? We live with a system of rules and laws. The fact is that gun violence in America is the #1 killer of our kids. And we would be failing as a society if we rely solely on prosecutions after people have died to put parents in jail. That's the sign of failure. So that's the last resort. What we need to do, and we have the opportunity to make this a top priority in this election. Kamala Harris is going to continue one of the best historic records on gun violence preventions we've had. And Donald Trump says about school shootings, we should just get over it. So he's in the back pocket of the gun industry. We need better law. That happens with elections in the ballot box. We need better enforcement of the law. And in the ballot box, we need better enforcement of the law. And we do need to change social norms around gun ownership, and that means safe storage. We need all of those things. There's no one thing that has to happen. All of the things have to happen because guns are the #1 killer of our kids in America.
Given that, Chris, that guns are the #1 killer of children here in the US, are you seeing any progress in any state that you can point to?
Yeah, we are. Actually, with Joe Biden as president and the comprehensive approach he's taken to gun violence prevention, the passage of the historic bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the most comprehensive gun reform bill ever to pass Congress since the Brady Law, the enactment by 25 states of red flag laws, not Georgia, the expansion of background checks in states, not Georgia, the passage of assault weapons bans in 9 states, not Georgia. We are making a lot of progress, right? And in states that do adopt these laws, adopt these public safety laws, you see a material reduction in gun death and injury. And nationwide across the country, we've seen on average a 22% reduction in homicide in this country. So anyone who says, it's not guns that matter, it's people, guns matter, and better gun policy means lives saved.
With so many kids going back to school at the moment, Chris, it should be a really exciting time for families. But what are some families and children going through, knowing that this could be a possibility in their life and knowing that in the classroom they sometimes have to prepare for the fact that there could be a gun incident?
Lucy, it's a terror in the United States, and the impact on our kids, we call it the lockdown generation. You know, I'm of a certain age. I have a 20 and 22-year-old. They've only ever known lockdown drills at school. That was not part of how I was raised. And I'll just recount a conversation I had with my friend who's the Commonwealth's attorney, the chief law enforcement officer for the town where I lived. She has a 13-year-old. They were talking about what happened in Georgia. She's watching the news and she says, Mom, you know, I felt safe in my school, but I'm watching this and I feel like it could happen here. Can you tell me it won't? And she said, I wish I could. I can't. And then she said something that just really chills me. She said, well, I felt better in my old school, her elementary school. She's a 13-year-old, so she switched schools, because I would just want to run, Mom. If they say hide and fight, the shooters, who are mostly students, they're going through the lockdown drills too. They'll know where I am. So I felt better in my old school because we were next to woods and I knew I could really hide, but now I can't. Just think about that. So this child, she's 13 years old. She's been in lockdown drills all this time. She's thought in detail about what she would do to try to save her life. What that means is she's accepted shootings to some extent as a real potential in her life. That to me is a failure. It is a stain on America because we can't grapple with the laws that we know work. And it, honestly, as a mom, it redoubles my commitment to ensure that we pass the best laws, we have better enforcement, because this is a preventable tragedy. This is a uniquely American epidemic, and it doesn't have to be this way.
As sea levels and ocean temperatures continue to rise around the world, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has issued an SOS. He says that stands for Save Our Seas. His appeal comes in the run-up to COP29 that's happening in Azerbaijan later this year. For more on the state of the oceans, my colleague Carl Nesman has been speaking with marine biologist and author Ayana Elizabeth Johnson.
The oceans are warming very quickly in a way that scientists had not predicted, which is always concerning. That's because of climate change. The ocean has absorbed over 90% of the heat that's been trapped by all the greenhouse gases we've emitted by burning fuels and chopping down forests. And that is the very definition of unsustainable. And the ocean has also absorbed about a third of the greenhouse gases that we've emitted. So all that carbon dioxide is getting absorbed into the ocean, which is changing the chemistry of seawater. It's getting more acidic. The pH value is shifting, which makes it hard for things with shells, etc., to try to grow their skeletons. And so we've really fundamentally changed the ocean in a way that we're not sure what's going to happen next. And so these small island nations like Tonga are dealing with the brunt of ocean issues, climate issues that they did not cause. And that is obviously a massive climate injustice on top of all the rest of it. So I think as much as I worry, believe me, I worry about the fate of the ocean, about the impact. I think it's really important that we look to the ocean truly as a hero in the climate crisis. We would be much worse off if it weren't for the ocean buffering all these impacts of climate change and offering us all these solutions.
Well, it's a nice segue because your new book is titled, What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures. You know, there's so many worrying headlines.
I just got the actual hard copy in the mail.
Oh,
yesterday.
Beautiful. Yeah, so there it is. And, you know, it really is a hopeful title. I mean, How do you keep hope alive in a time like this? What's your mindset and how should people kind of go about thinking about the climate crisis in a hopeful way?
It's probably important to note first that I'm not hopeful. I mean, I'm not an optimist. I'm a scientist. I'm a realist. I've seen the scientific projections. I know what the odds are. I understand the trajectories, but I also know that there is still a wide range of possible futures. And a lot of the future that we get depends on what we do now, what each of us do, what governments do, what corporations do. Actually, we're not just sitting around waiting for the apocalypse. We are every day building the future that we will be living in.
What does getting it right mean to you? How would we change? What would we need to do in order to get these solutions into place or to start to really tackle climate change in a meaningful way?
Fundamentally, I think it means implementing the solutions we already have. There's nothing we need to wait for. It's a matter of how quickly we can shift the status quo, shift policies, shift culture in order to implement all of this as rapidly as possible. We don't have to wait for fusion energy or anything else. We can just get started right now.
Boeing's Starliner spacecraft has returned to Earth from the International Space Station, but without the astronauts who were meant to be on board. The capsule suffered technical problems after it launched, and that made it too risky for the pair to return until next year. So instead of spending 8 days in space, they're now ending up spending 8 months. Our science editor, Rebecca Morrell, has the story.
Starliner is now backing away from station and starting its return to Earth.
Boeing's Starliner capsule on its way home, beginning its 6-hour voyage with a blast of its engines.
And you're seeing the light show there on your screen.
But the spacecraft is empty, without the astronauts it was supposed to carry. NASA's Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore will now stay on the International Space Station. Technical problems with Starliner meant NASA said it wasn't safe enough to take the pair home. Sonny Williams spoke to Mission Control as the spacecraft, she nicknamed Calypso, departed.
It is time to bring Calypso home. We have your backs, and you've got this. Bring her back to Earth. Good luck.
Picking up Starliner now from its lower altitude, about 6,000 feet above.
In the night sky of New Mexico, a first glimpse of the capsule.
3 good parachutes, looking great.
Its descent is slowed as it closes in.
Touchdown. Starliner is back on Earth.
The landing's a success, but it's a bittersweet moment for the mission team.
From a human perspective, all of us feel happy about the successful landing, but then there's a piece of us, all of us, that we wish it would have been the way we had planned it. We had planned to have the mission land with Butch and Sonny on board.
The astronauts are to remain in space until February next year. Their 8-day mission extended to 8 months. But NASA says they're in good spirits, settling into life on the space station and taking in its spectacular views. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
Let's take a moment to take you live now to Papua New Guinea. Pope Francis is there holding a mass in the capital, Port Moresby. He arrived on Friday evening from Indonesia. He's 87 years old at the moment. This is his very first visit to the Oceania region. It's a 4-nation trip. He's going through Southeast Asia and other parts of Oceania as well. Incredibly tiring, long and challenging trip, but one he's been wanting to make for quite a long time. While in Papua New Guinea, he's going to make a day trip to the northwestern town of Vanimo before departing the country on Monday. After that, it's East Timor and Singapore before returning to Rome on September the 30th. So here is Pope Francis in Papua New Guinea. Stay with us on BBC News.
This is it. One play. This is when we find out.
Hey, quick question. Student body math proficiency. Would we say it's good, fair, satisfactory? What? Like a percentage, if you had to guess.
Get out of here, man.
Understood.
Hey, grab it.
Great student-teacher ratio.
Marcy! We gotta go! Marcy! We have got to go!
We bring you the real in-depth school info.
What were you thinking?
I don't know.
Ding dong.
Homes.com.
මේ තියන්නේ මම චිත්‍ර 11ක එකපාර ඇඳලා ඒක වයිරල් වෙච්ච වීඩියෝ එකේ චිත්‍ර ටික. ගොඩක් වෙලාවට ඉතින් අපිට සල්ලි දෙන්නේ නැහැ. එයා චිත්‍ර ඇඳලා විකුණලා එයාගේ අධ්‍යාපන මේක කරගන්නවා. වැරදි සමාජයට යන්නේ නැතුව අනිත් දරුවන්ට කියන්නේ නිර්මාණ කරලා ඉදිරියට ඇවිත් මේ වගේ හොඳ ළමෙක් වගේ ඉන්න කියලා.
Watch more stories like this at bbc.com.
You know, you only get one body. It might be the perfect size to do this. Your body may take up a lot of space, or have to speak with its hands. But no matter what body you're born with, you only get one. Let's fight like hell for it.
If anyone has told you that gaining weight, feeling tired, and joint issues is just a part of getting older, they are wrong. My name is Dr. Stephen Gundry, and I found a new way to support my health. It's called BioComplete 3. BioComplete 3 works by restoring your gut health from the inside out. This is working for everybody.
I was 270. I'm now 140. It just feels amazing.
You can try BioComplete 3 risk-free for 90 days. Go to guthealthsecret.com.
We can just have someone on Fiverr do it. It's no big deal.
Hiring freelancers just for small tasks is like hiring Martha Stewart as an...
Here's your coffee.
Oh, best intern ever.
Sometimes great talent is right under your nose.
What's your name again?
In 2002, Banksy created one of his most famous pieces, The Girl with the Balloon. Originally stenciled onto a bridge in London, he later painted it on canvas and released it.
The one that I see the most is the one with the little girl with the balloon that she loses. I like that one.
I think everybody enjoys being part
of the Banksy kind of game, if you like. I think this is one of the interesting things about the sort of Banksy phenomenon, is the fact that everybody feels like they're part of the kind of like experience.
Banksy is where he is in the world today because he does pictures that you don't need words to understand. Season's greetings, the boy standing in the snow, and he's not in the snow, he's actually from the pollution that's coming around the corner. So it doesn't matter if you're in France or Germany or Italy or Peru or China, you can understand his picture, you can understand his message instantly.